just received, so thank you. Good evening, Council. Call to order this workshop of October 2nd, 2017. As folks know, we will be briefly recessing a little before 6 to join Safe Voices for their domestic violence vigil at Festival Plaza. So it is my hope that we could be efficient and tackle items A and B before we do that. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to our General Assistance Director.
Good evening, councilors, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Manager. My name is Holly Olivier, and I'm the Director of the Health and Social Services Department. I'm here today with some ordinance changes for your review. I believe you were provided with two separate packets. One is concerning the changes to our overall maximums, and the other is regarding the non-maximum changes, and this is pertaining to burials and cremations under Chapter 24, Article 2. At this time, if you could draw your attention to the information sheet titled Adoption of Appendices, and this is concerning the overall maximum increases. This is effective October 1st, 2017 through September 30th of 2018. I'm seeking approval for four different sections. One is the overall maximums, one is for food, the other is rent, and the last is for electricity concerning electrically heated hot water. The budgetary impacts here are the overall maximums are increasing 9.25%. The food maximums are actually decreasing 1.3%. Our rental maximums are increasing 11%, and the utilities concerning electrically heated hot water are increasing 1.25%. I am recommending we approve these changes so that we will be in compliance with the State General Assistance Program and receive that 70% reimbursement from the state. Otherwise, our program will be penalized and we will lose any state reimbursement. This is a yearly ordinance change that takes effect annually October 1st and runs through September 30th of any given year. And at this time, if you could please review the attached appendices A through D, and I'll briefly explain the reasons for the increases. Appendix A, the overall maximums. This is the maximum amount my department can assist in a 30-day period for all basic necessities combined. The overall maximums is increasing primarily due to the increased costs in housing. Appendix B, the decrease in food amounts. This amount is based on what's called the Thrifty Food Plan. This plan is a USDA designed food plan specifying foods and amounts of foods to provide adequate nutrition. They collect data annually, and the average monthly calculations actually decreased slightly from last year. Appendix C, for the rental increase, the Department of Housing and Urban Development puts these guidelines into place based on the fair market value of properties in our area. Unfortunately, we have no control over how large or small the increase is for any given year. The rental maximums are increasing for both heated and unheated rentals. And lastly, for Appendix D, the increase in electricity, specifically for electrically heated hot water. This small increase is simply because the standard rate has increased a little bit since last year. So if there's any questions on these changes, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Yes.
Thank you very much. I understand that obviously we have to follow these or else.
Yes.
So my questions are just merely for my own information.
Yeah.
I think last year when we had this same situation come up, I had asked that we had a nearby town, New Gloucester, where those were much higher,
Yep.
only because they were in Cumberland County,
Yep.
which is, so I just didn't know if there was any way that that could ever change, or, I mean, it didn't make sense that somebody in New Gloucester could get so much more than somebody right across the line in Auburn.
It's just the fair market value of the property in our county, I think, is substantially
In the
less.
county?
Yeah. Well, Lewiston, Auburn specifically is what.
Yeah, I just don't know how New Gloucester must be affected by Portland's rent. And that goes to my next question is,
Yeah.
do they use all housing? So it doesn't matter if it's a brand-new place that people are paying $1,500 a month for a
I
condo as
believe it's
opposed
just
to
an average. I think HUD takes the average.
of all
Yeah,
housing?
yes.
So
and
it
then-
really kind of brings that,
Yeah.
because when I see increases,
I know.
especially when inflation has been, nothing, stagnant, and I don't think that a lot of landlords can say they've
The
gotten a heck of a lot
landlords,
more.
I will say, the landlords have been pretty decent about keeping their rent at a minimum. After seeing this today, they may knock on my door
Well, that's
for
what I
a
mean.
couple
Yeah, it's
more
kind of
dollars.
funny that it would go up so much, and yet
Yep, it's 11%.
landlords would tell you that there hasn't been that much of an increase, so I'm just
Yeah.
curious. Thank you.
So this will be on the next agenda for first reading?
No other questions?
All set.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you very much, appreciate it.
And if we could turn our attention now to the second packet, this is regarding general assistance changes specifically for burials and cremations. This becomes effective on November 1st of 2017. The budgetary impacts for this, I believe, will actually help the city because these changes are allowing me to obtain information from relatives, financial institutions outside of the state of Maine, where previously I was not allowed to do that. It also allows me to hold additional family members accountable that weren't previously included on the language. Again, obviously, I want to recommend to approve the changes because in keeping with compliance for this program, the state reimburses the city 70% of everything I submit at the end of my billing month. So we want to keep that in compliance. Previous meetings, these ordinance changes may occur every 2 years unless a law is passed in an emergency legislative session. However, they do not always occur every 2 years, and it's my understanding it's been several years since the last one has actually changed. And if you could take a look at the attached changes under Chapter 24, Article 2. To summarize specifically, the information from other sources will be amended to penalize the financial institutions that do not disclose the information of a deceased individual or that responsible family member. We need this information to determine eligibility, and previously, banks would not be penalized for not divulging information. The second change regarding this section is determination of family members' ability to pay. This is being amended to include spouses and registered domestic partners as financially responsible. Believe it or not, previously, spouses and registered domestic partners were not included in the language as a responsible family member. Additionally, as I mentioned recently, it allows for me to access information outside of the state of Maine for relatives, and previously it was only in the state of Maine. And lastly, I can access information now from financial institutions that might have any assets of the deceased, whereas before it was very difficult for me to get that information. So with that, I do think that's a positive change, as I will have more options for additional family members and leverage with the banks and divulging the account information of the individual and their family.
Thank you. This one I had a particular problem with, only
Okay.
because I do understand that, yeah, it may save us some money, only, well, I don't know
Yes.
if it'll save us money, because we'll either get it from the state or we get it from the deceased.
Yeah.
My concern here was that you can go after grandparents, parents, children, grandchildren of the deceased.
Yeah.
And that the bank is required to give information if it's available of those people. So if a person who's indigent passes away, then anybody who's their relative is open for scrutiny, and you can go in and grab their records and find out if they're financially able or not and bill them for this service. And I just think that's going way too far. I don't know who
Right.
came up with this and whether we have any
Yeah.
way to fight this, but this is ridiculous, because, again, it's the whole family. It's anybody
Yeah. Yeah.
who's related to that person, their financial records are open. And I don't know where you draw the line here. I think this has gone way too far myself. I don't know.
Right. I will say normally it's, Generally, it's a funeral director that will call me and explain that if someone has passed away, there's no living relatives, there's no children or known family members. So oftentimes, it's just the individual that has passed away and no living relatives or known relatives. That's been my personal experience. So I've never had to look into other incomes, but this will give me an option in the future if that ever becomes an issue.
I personally think that it may be a minor thing, but it could be a
Right.
major thing for some people. I don't know. I guess we have to, you know, approve this.
Yeah,
But
again,
at
if
this
we
point, I wish
don't, we
we
will
knew-
lose funding from the state. They won't reimburse us the portion that we
Mr.
get.
Mayor, you may know, is there any way that our delegation, no? This comes from the feds?
No, it's state law. So I just, at this point, I don't foresee this particular piece changing. This is the standard that's held, and if you had 493 communities taking 493 approaches, I'm sure the governor actually would enjoy that, because you could take the bill on your own. If you don't like the state reimbursing, the state
Well,
commissions.
I don't,
just pay for
it
it.
isn't so much the money as it is the intrusion, that we can go in and go
I
after
wouldn't
a person
necessarily
who's
say that I
indigent.
would-
They can go after all of their family members to find out who's got money, how much, where, and whatever.
Responsibility.
Free country, that's why.
No, I was just gonna point out that it is a state-based change, and the reimbursement would be lost if it were to not comply.
Well, you could have an uncle, you could have a grandchild who's off in another city somewhere, and you have no financial responsibility to that person, and now with this law, we can go in and grab your records and make you, or, I don't know, it says here, you can try to make it.
Yes.
They're not required legally to pay. It's just that you can go in and find out if they
And I
have
can
funds,
find
and then
out,
you can
yes.
bill them and see what happens. I don't see here that they're legally required to send a check, are they?
I would have to look into that further and see. Again, like I said, most of the time, it's just the funeral director calling me saying there's no living relatives. So this hasn't been an issue at all.
Sure, in the past, it hasn't, but it
Yeah,
could going
yeah.
forward, so.
Okay, thank you.
That-
Good evening, members of the council, Mr. Mayor, and Mr. City Manager. My name is Yvette Boutno of the Community Development Office, and I have with me Michelle McClellan from the School Department and also Richard Whiting from Auburn Housing Authority. So on September 18th, the council heard a presentation on the Stay Home Rental Assistance Program and how we propose to implement it. And after a really thoughtful, I thought a very thoughtful discussion with the council, staff is still not quite clear on how to proceed as far as whether we want to do a broad-based or whether you want to do a broad-based or a focus on one school. The committee members have gotten back together and discussed it, and we recommend strongly that we do a broad-based approach. And with that, I'm going to turn over the mic to Michelle, and she can give you more information as to why we feel this way.
Go this way. There, that's better. Thank you and good evening. I understand that it just might be helpful for you all to have some insight into the conversation and how we came about remaining open with the rental assistance program for all of our actually pre-K through 8 families here in the school department, those who qualify obviously under the McKinney-Vento Act. So the thinking was pretty clear cut in looking at the data, the number of families, number of students actually, who qualify for McKinney-Vento services, looking at that number and dissecting the data to see if there was any trend in any one school, any one location. It's pretty apparent that this is not neighborhood specific, that this is an issue that faces across neighborhoods, across our district.
For those on the council and those at home that don't know the act you're referring to, can you please provide a
Sure.
little bit more background?
Yeah, no problem. McKinney-Vento, you mean, Mayor? Yes. So McKinney-Vento is the law that's been in place since 1960s that addresses students who are faced with homelessness. And it's a law that provides services to assure that there's continuity in their educational program. So we use that as the standard as to whether somebody is homeless or not homeless. We use the criteria from that act. So looking at that and looking at the data across the district, for example, for last year, where we had 90 students who were eligible under that act, when we looked at it, it's an issue that faces neighborhoods across our schools, in each of our schools. So to provide the rental assistance program, which we're thrilled to have that, we're thrilled at the responsiveness of this council when they heard that the high mobility issue that our schools were facing, that this council was responsive in that and saying, what can we do? So the rental assistance program, which is going to be a huge piece of services that we can provide for students to maintain that continuity in educational programming. When we looked at across, if there was one place, one school, it really isn't. It isn't fair to say that it's one school where we have a large percentage of the problem or that issue facing a school. So that was simply the thinking. We based it on data. We looked at the data in our schools. We looked at what we felt was a reasonable amount of families who could be impacted given the amount of money that was available, and felt like for this pilot particularly to have that open across all the schools made the most sense.
How much does the school department currently spend annually to serve those 90 families?
That's a great question. So there's two answers to that. One is a transportation alone cost, and then the other is other services such as backpacks or food or that sort of thing. So we have that broken out. Annually, we split costs on transportations between the two districts that are working to maintain that consistent educational program. So it's about 100, I think last year's was 160,000, but that's split in half. So for the Auburn School Department would pay I believe it was 82,000. It was right around 82,000.
I want to clarify, and I'd be interested to hear the council's feedback, because I followed up with HUD to clarify, and because the council has historically voted on the program rules, we're going to have to vote on these rules. These are not rules that staff and program rules that staff can just put into place. The council has to actually adopt the program rules. When we talked about a program for rental assistance, the target was getting at the turnover in individual schools, so that the rate of turnover at the beginning to end of the year. It was not to target those students who there was an added cost to the school department to fund transportation back into district. So I'd like to better understand the difference between targeting those who may, during the course of an academic year, have to move out of that particular school's district, and the data behind those 90 families that you referenced, because the intent here is not to supplant one block of funding that's coming out of the school department for CDBG dollars. So better understanding, if you're already spending $80,000 a year, what does the $90,000 on top of the $80,000 deliver? Is the school department still going to spend that $80,000 but spend it on additional support for those families? Or is this $90,000 simply going to allow the school department to move their $80,000 elsewhere?
I'm afraid I'm not really following your thinking, so I apologize. I'll try to answer the best I can.
You said you spent there's $160,000 a year that's spent to support those 90 families.
Yes.
Including transportation from out of district into district.
Yes, this rental assistant program is not, that's not the intent of this rental assistant program to address any fiscal responsibility on the schools. It's to address the educational disruption that takes place for students. So that's just why I'm having a little difficulty answering the question.
Aren't we talking, Mr. Mayor, about direct funding to families for rental assistance specifically, and not other department costs that may be associated with keeping kids in the school, if there are any. That's what this program is geared toward.
If they're not paying for, if the school department's not paying for transportation from Brunswick to Auburn because the city is now paying for an Auburn apartment, you then eliminate the cost of the transportation from that other community.
So what we're trying to do with this, what I understand this first came up was when the mobility, the issue of the high mobility rate came about. And so this was to preemptively address the mobility, the high mobility rate. I believe that was the intent from the conversations and the community conversations that I sat in on and then subsequently following. So it wasn't intended to bring down any cost in the school department.
So,
That wasn't the intent of it.
With respect to mobility, I thought we'd heard from Washburn that mobility was 35 to 40%, which,
Oh, higher than that.
okay, so in this population, there's 400?
No, the population there is about 230.
Okay, so if the mobility is 40%, you're still talking about more than 100 families impacted just at Washburn.
Yes, and the same can be said at Walton.
Okay,
And at the same, they're about the same high mobility rate between those two schools, and they're about the same size population as well.
so if there are only 90 families that are eligible for the act that you referenced, what's causing the mobility for the hundreds of other families?
People move in and out for all kinds of reasons, so it may not be that they're homeless. They leave for a variety of assorted reasons. Would you like me to list them?
Do we have the data? I'd like to see the data if you
Well,
could.
if I can ask a question, I don't understand why we're getting this deep into the weeds. We already voted on this as a matter of policy as a city council when we appropriated
We
the,
voted to allocate money, not
we
for a
voted to allocate
program.
money, and we had these discussions. And I think that what's been provided to the city council as far as the work that's been done thus far really does address the concerns that we all talked about. I'm not saying that there may not be other issues that we're going to have to iron out, but what's been proposed here seems to be pretty well geared toward providing direct rental assistance to families to a very specific dollar amount to keep their kids in the school. And I don't see why we have to revisit whether or not the issue exists or to dig so far deep into these hard questions that we've already workshopped before we even allocated the funds. I mean, we're here to decide, is this going to be, as I understand it, we're here to workshop whether or not this should be a very neighborhood school-specific allocation. This program is limited to a specific school, or is this going to be a district-wide program? If this is going to be something deeper, then I said, let's have that discussion, but I think that that's the clarification that we're looking for tonight, as far as I understand it. And if there's more information as we go into the weeds of what the final guidelines are that this council has to adopt, then, then we can have those discussions down the road. But as far as I'm concerned, what we're talking about here tonight is whether or not this is a district-wide program or a neighborhood-specific program, and I know where I stand.
And perhaps maybe I can answer it backwards, or maybe this doesn't answer your question, but from what I think I'm understanding you, we have some families who would like to stay in Auburn, would like to maintain consistency for their children, and even though their family is in a great state of disruption, they'd like to maintain educational continuity. And because of circumstances beyond their means, they can't do that. And so I think of one family, and I'm making a composite family, but that was a family of 5 who were in their car at the end of a school year. And they lived in their car because they didn't have the deposit. Their house had been condemned, and they didn't have the deposit to get into another rental. So this type of a program would allow continuity for that particular family. We don't have multitudes of family who are going to fit this criteria, but we do throughout the school year have several. And so this program isn't going to eradicate homelessness or eradicate the issue of the high mobility rate. It is going to help provide continuity for students in our schools to have less disruption in their educational program.
Were it to be a neighborhood-specific program, what would the neighborhoods be? Or what would the schools be?
I'd have to, I mean, I did look at the
Washburn
data.
and Walton, probably?
Actually, it probably, if you're going on, Adam, you're talking about just from a data perspective?
Yes, yeah.
It's not our high, Washburn is not our
I'm sorry.
highest.
Walton,
Walton is high, Sherwood Heights is high.
Sherwood Heights is high.
AMS can be high,
So
depending on the year.
the sort of second question to that is, if it is citywide, there would be nothing that precluded it from applying to mostly those schools and those neighborhoods in practice.
Yes, the only caution I have with that is because it's the first time through, I can't look back and say, if we had 8 slots, let's say, that we could support, that we could get 8 from Walton.
Right.
Because it's going to be some specific criteria around who will qualify for that. So I'd hate to have that not be able to benefit
Right.
a student in the Fairview district or a family in the Fairview district who met the criteria but didn't have the right catchment area where they're living. That's really what's the thinking behind it.
We've got an appointment to go to, so we're going to recess briefly, and we can pick this back up when we get back from the vigil. We'll be in recess.
And I won't be here. I have another appointment after that, but I think Rick is ready to speak to you after that.
home that we're willing. Questions about the rental assistance program? I'll look to the council. Any further questions that you might have on what's on the table?
No question per se, just I would, it sounds like staff is giving us a pretty definitive preference when it comes to how they think this program will be carried out in the most efficient way and effective way possible. So I know that, the question of how or whether we need to target this program to some area that's smaller than the entire city is something that we've continued to discuss, but my hope would be that we would defer to staff and give this a year with it reaching the whole city and evaluate it once we have some data.
Real quick, yeah, when we talked about it at the last council meeting, I have my opinions about whether it's focused or broad. After hearing what I've heard today, that I don't have a problem now with it being more broad, but I still have to stand on the council's desire to slow down the transition rate was the goal. That was what we asked for. So I know it is homeless, but is it homeless in danger of transition? Is it somebody who's going to have to leave their apartment and move to another city because they can't afford to stay where they are? I'm hoping that's going to be the focus and not just simply find homeless. I mean, homeless is a different, it's the same, but it's different. I mean, there's homeless folks that are already homeless, but there's those that are in danger of having to leave the school district or leave their school because they're in danger of homelessness or having to move. We found that sometimes they had to move because they couldn't pay their rent, so they just left and found an apartment, say in Lewiston or another city, and then when they get in financial trouble again, they move to another city. And hopefully we're going to slow that down. I mean, that was what our goal was.
Yes, that
So
is
whether
the
it's
focus
broad-based
of
or
the program.
focus, as long as we can see the proof of this working on a broad, I have no problem with it being broad. I just don't want to lose, I don't want to dilute it in the fact that we can't see any results because it's so broad. So that's just my point on that.
Anyone else?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I thought the intent was to have the student finish out the year in the school what they started. And the other thing I thought it was is that there was some sort of limit on it. I mean, it wouldn't be for 10 years. It would be something like 2 years or so. I am aware that the school department does transfer people, I guess, from Brunswick to Auburn and meets them halfway. I don't know if it's to finish out the school year or if it's just something that's been going on for 5 or 6 years. Too bad the person's not here from the school department that could answer that question, but we should really instead of putting a Band-Aid on this, I mean, we couldn't finish out the year type of thing, but the real problem is I guess the parents are, between jobs, are having some financial difficulty. And that's, if you really want to put out the fire, that's where to start.
All right, so next steps, I guess this will be packaged with either a resolve or otherwise for the next council meeting?
I didn't hear what you said, I'm sorry.
Whether it needs to be a resolve or an order for the next council meeting for the council to vote on adoption of the program guidelines?
It's my understanding from HUD regulations that we're not required to come back before the council for approval.
It's my understanding
Guidelines.
from speaking with HUD that that it's left to each individual city, and the practice in Auburn has been that the council adopts program guidelines, as we have, at least the 6 years I've been here and in the years before that I observed, new programs were adopted by the council. We've had program rule changes come back to this council and new program rules, so I would expect that we would continue that practice.
Yvette, I'm fine with that process, having it come back to the council.
Okay. And you're right, it has been that way in the past, but it was just in the past 6 months or so that this came up.
Next item we have on the agenda is
Thank you, guys.
taking a vacation on Troy Street.
Vacation?
Taking a vacation on Troy Street. Vacation. Mr. Green, Mr. Chamings, welcome.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Yes, first of all, I just want a little clarification. On the agenda, it lists a vacation at Troy Street, which I'm not sure that's the best place to take one, but what we're really wanting to discuss is a discontinuance of Troy Street. We've been working with Gary Johnson, and he's the one to educate anyone on these type of matters. So just a real quick background. Here we have the Pan Am Railroad. Here is the Auburn Public Library, Court Street, Union Street. And as you are aware of, there's been a property that the city still owns, but is now under a purchase and sales agreement with a developer to develop this T-shaped parcel right through here. Part of the discussions, and also as what's listed on the purchase and sales agreement, is that the city would sell this parcel and a section of Troy Street right-of-way. If you've been out that way, you may have a hard time finding Troy Street. It's basically kind of an amorphous paved area that's kind of merges into the parking area, the city's parking lot right through here. So as part of the discussions with the developer on moving forward with this project, like I mentioned, discontinuing this section of Troy Street has been part of the discussion. So that's what I'm here in front of you tonight. This discontinuance is a step in the direction of creating some more parking area. It would also be in the ownership of the developer, so there would be lessened responsibility for the city on maintenance, although at this point, in a discussion at our Plan Review Committee, Public Services said that they would be willing to go ahead and continue snow plowing because it would just be a more efficient way to move the snow plows up and down this way. There is a small section that I'm showing right through here that's adjacent to another property that is not being recommended for discontinuance. And when you go through a discontinuance process, it involves a petition as well as notification to abutting property owners, and there are laws that allow for damages if you take away a right-of-way that's adjacent to a property owner. So we wanted to avoid any type of damages, the possibility of damages with this property owner right here. We have met with that property owner. He's supportive of the Troy Street project in general, and he has no problem with the discontinuance proposal too, as far as any adjacent property owners. So that's the basic premise of what's before you this evening with this workshop. If you do support this, like I mentioned, the staff would appreciate you directing us to move forward, putting together a petition and a more detailed map of this specific area, and then moving the process forward.
Do you have a timeline, Doug? If the council tonight is supportive, is the hearing at the next meeting? Is there a longer notice period? What do you foresee for a timeline?
What I did not mention is that the developer is looking to take this, his site plan and special exception to the planning board. In your information sheet, it lists November. That has now been bumped to December. So we do want to move on this, but we have some other actions in the area that we're trying to coordinate as far as getting some issues that we want to iron out with a site plan, special exception for the planning board, as well as some nearby properties that could facilitate this whole development. So we would appreciate moving forward either at, I guess, the October 16th meeting or early in November would be helpful.
Well, in the event it's a tie and I have to vote, I'm supportive, and I actually want to give kudos to Dan Goyette. When some conversations about road reconstruction in this area had come up, the city held back a bit on doing reconstruction of Troy Street. So we're having a conversation now about a street that was pending reconstruction that we won't have to fund if we discontinue this street versus putting that money into the ground and ultimately having it pulled back up again. So give a shout out to our Public Works team. Any questions, comments from the council? Go ahead, Andy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My concern really has to do with what I saw in the buy-sell agreement compared to what you're looking at there. In the buy-sell agreement, the diagram shows all the way to the end on Troy Street. So I don't know which it is that you're proposing, whether it's a part of Troy Street or the whole thing that's being discontinued and will be deeded over to the new,
When the developer prepared the initial draft of the purchase and sales agreement, we hadn't had this level of discussion yet, which we have met with the developers and his staff quite a few times, at least 3 times so far. But at one of the preliminary early meetings, we did discuss this issue of stopping the discontinuance before you get to Library Street. And so, again, we thought it would be in the city's best interest to avoid possible damages. Again, the property owner who would be potentially impacted if the discontinuance occurred there has no problem with a small section of public street just existing in front of his property. That's how his tenants access a parking area for that 12 unit.
Just to resolve Councilor Titus's question, so the document for the purchase and sale showed the entirety of Troy Street. The executed documents with the developer only have the portion that abuts the city-owned parcel.
That is correct. It's been amended. It's been
so
changed.
this purchase and sale will be another one that amends that, because it's in the description, too.
It sounds like it's already been amended.
It has been.
Yes, it was amended.
Because my
prior to
concern is also
execution.
parking in that area. I don't know if the library is going to lose any parking because we're doing this.
I'm glad you brought that up. As we all know, that the library has stepped up and expressed some concern about this development and what impact it might have on the parking area out there. And the staff, the developer, are both working with the library to work out transfer potentially of other parking possibilities and an overall parking plan for this entire area, because there's also, besides potential impacts to the public library, there is some potential change and impacts on available emergency snow parking. We want to address both of those situations, so we're working on that as well.
Could just add street parking on Court Street, couldn't we?
And the library board discussed this, but the library board has not taken a position. Library staff had some concerns, and my only comment to the board was we have an urban library, and promoting wellness by walking 2 blocks may not be a bad thing, because I've never seen there be a parking issue around the library.
I'm trying to get a visual here. The proposed project, where does the parking lot for that proposed project, within that red block, tell me where the building ends and the parking begins?
As it stands right now,
Yep.
the development, the building for that development takes up 65% of that T-shaped city-owned lot as
Yep.
it stands right now. What I did not mention is that on the Pan Am Railroad, which is adjacent to Troy Street, there's an existing parking area
Yeah.
that's under a long-term lease with Pan Am.
Yep.
So that, right now, is about 20 available spaces for the purpose of meeting the parking requirement for that development. And we're actively pursuing other options and other opportunities to allow the development to meet their parking requirement, plus have more parking for the library and some emergency snow parking. And we're going to have continued discussions with you about that.
So the primary access for, say, the parking for residents is going to be from library, or is it going to be from Hampshire, or?
Okay. While the public status of Troy Street is going to be changed
Right.
legally on the ground, it's still going to remain an access. They're not taking away the access ability of vehicles to move from Hampshire Street down to Library Street. There's still going to be a free movement of vehicles
Okay.
through there.
So it's likely that they would come from either direction to
Yes.
access the parking lot? Okay.
Questions? Support from the council then for staff to initiate the process to?
Yeah.
Okay. Get the green light to initiate that process, and we'll, based on the appropriate timing, we'll be ready for a public hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Last item, Mr. Chamings.
Sort of on the same subject, the city agreed to partially fund the Troy Street project with $110,000 in home funds. The allocation of these funds need to be voted on. We already voted on the funds for the Minot Avenue project. This one's in the purchase and sale agreement, so we're having the workshop today so we can move forward with a first reading and a second reading and an order.
Questions from the council? My only comment would be to follow up on Councilor Tardik's. I know the purchase and sales were included in the packet. If there is an amended version, when we have the meeting to vote on the home funds, if we could include the updated purchase and sales, so the most current documents are there.
Yeah, if you wish, we can make that available tomorrow.
No, Council? Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
folks. We've got 15 minutes. I don't know if any of the executive sessions, none of them require action. If any of them are brief, we could tend to one of them now and not at the end of the meeting. I'll look to staff.
Do that if you want to.
Which one is the most efficient? Land acquisition, the Osprey, or the income utilization?
I think land acquisition.
Okay. Would a council like to make said motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move we enter into executive session to discuss an economic development matter pursuant to 1 MRSA 4056C.
Second.
Motion from Councilor Burns, second from Councilor Walker. Those in favor? Those opposed? 7-0. We will return to begin the meeting at 7.
the fence?
Exactly.
We miss him.
He's gonna move the whole fence anyways.
It's probably,
It's a junkyard, it isn't bothering anybody anyway, so forget.
Good evening. I call to order this meeting of the Auburn City Council for October 2nd, 2017. If you'd all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. We have no consent items. We have the minutes from September 18th. That would entertain a motion.
Motion to accept.
Second.
Motion by Councilor Burns, second by Councilor Walker. All those in favor, show of hands. Those opposed, carries 7-0. Few proclamation presentation items this evening. You have in your packet a proclamation for International Walker Bike to School Day, which is this coming Wednesday. I know we have a number of schools that are doing events. One in Councilor Walker's ward I'll mention. If folks are able to be there in the morning, Walton School has all of their students dropped off at Raymond Park across from the Legion Hall, and they all walk from there to Walton together. Great community event. So I want to point that out, and I also, in the proclamation, just remind us all again of the work of the Complete Street Committee and how important pedestrian and cycling safety is, not only for our young people walking to school, if they so choose, but for folks that choose to walk around our city. It's something that we should never lose sight of. The second item, probably one of my favorite tasks here as mayor, and the last time I'll have a chance to do that. The Auburn Book Award winner is here with us this evening. If you'd like to come forward and grab a seat, sir, I'm gonna put you on the hot spot. This is Benjamin Condit. He's the winner of the 2017 Book Award. This is a contest that's been held annually since 2001. And if you walk from the on the second floor here are display cases. You can see a number of our previous award winners. None have had the tie choices like our guests here this evening. Figures the one night I don't wear a bow tie, but you make it look good. Benjamin's here, and I'm going to ask him in a moment to share some of his book entitled The Mainland, and what went into that book. But this is a great program on October 21st at the Auburn Library from 11 a.m. until noon. All of you here in the audience and all of you at home have a chance to buy a copy of this book, which I would encourage you to do. And other student authors who are part of the program will be there as well. The books will be available for $5, which is a deal. I do have to make sure before Benjamin leaves, so I got the first copy, so this is one of the perks of the job. But the first thing I always do when I get a copy is I look for the signature. And it appears that the copy that I was given had not yet been signed by you, Benjamin. So before you leave tonight, I'm going to need you to sign this for me. Can you do that? Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to you. If you could maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, where you go to school, and what went into writing this book?
I go to school at Auburn Middle School. As of currently, during the time I wrote this book, I went to Fairview Elementary School, a great school with great teachers. And it was kind of interesting writing this book because I'd go through one phase and I'd like do one thing and then like go ahead, and then for a poem I'd write it, and then I'd write like 2 other poems, and then I'd come back to the first poem and like edit it and realize, oh, I could write this line or maybe this, or just interesting things like that. And I really enjoyed drawing because I don't usually draw as much as I did during the about 3 months, was it? Yeah. of writing this book, and it was just interesting to see how the book came together from the first, like, the submitting the, what do you call it? The proposal for the Auburn to get into it. And I mean, I wrote 3 poems to get into it, and only one of them is in here, and it's on, yeah, it's The Moose, very original poem. And yeah, it was interesting to do it. Yeah.
Well, I certainly appreciate a chance to read a book and have a copy of your book highlighting some of the really great places outside in Maine. I love the outdoors. We've got one of our counselors here is very involved with the Androscoggin Land Trust, and they help to build trails and protect wildlife habitat so people can enjoy getting outdoors right here in Auburn. So you don't have to go to Katahdin or Isle of Ho, though you certainly can. We've got some great places here to get outside. So I'm pleased with your book. I've got a small token of my appreciation I want to give you. This is a great award. This is a great award program because we have a chance to recognize great students that really are an example for what our school department can do, what our teachers, our parents, and folks can do in our community. But you're a great example of what we want to have every Auburn student aspire to. So I have for you a key to the city of Auburn.
Yeah.
The classic pose.
Hold on a second.
He actually signed a copy for you.
Oh, you got it. Can I keep this one too?
You got $5?
Classic. It's a classic excuse.
There's got to be some perks to the job, right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
And no, it's not going on eBay for $4 after this. Always a great presentation. So I'd encourage folks who are interested in the book or want to meet the other authors that that library event is great. The last communication is one that was received after the agenda and packet were finalized. I asked Peter if he could addend that so we could at least accept the communication into the record. The Joint Charter Commission, which brought to us a consolidation agreement, which the council accepted to be placed on the ballot and held a public hearing around. They have shared some additional clarifications from that document, and they had made a request to the council to consider a second public hearing. So that will be accepted when we accept these minutes at the next meeting. We are at our first open session of the meeting. Yes, sir.
Point of order. We'll talk about whether we're going to have a public, or will that be at the next time?
I'm gonna defer for that to be initiated by city councilors if they wish to have an agenda item added to consider that. I'm not going to do it on my own.
Very good.
We do have a member of the Charter Commission here. If he wishes to come during open session and clarify, he'd be free to, and certainly during the manager's report, if you want to ask for Peter's guidance, that would be in order as well. With that, I'll open the open session. Anyone who would like to speak to the council about something relating to council business is free to do so. The floor is open. Mr. Pelletier, welcome.
Thank you. Larry Pelletier, 129 2nd Street. Some months ago, I'd come before the council and expressed my interest in possibility of having our students take part in this governmental process here. Have a student rep like we do on the school board. We have a representation from the school, from the high school, and I'm just wondering if, I don't know if they'd take a charter change, a change in the charter or whatever, but just asking if we can look into that.
No? No need to. I'm not going to pressure anyone to give speeches. It may be good to get some... Please introduce yourself.
Charles Morrison, 46 Lake Street. I have read my book by Benjamin Condit. All of our sixth graders should write like that and illustrate like that. You have the communication. The purpose of requesting the second public hearing is just to, the initial documents we gave you are titled draft. People don't vote on drafts, they vote on finals. We've held 2 public hearings. The last one was just a week ago in Lewiston. Yeah, we have a couple of minor changes to the document resulting from some of the public meetings we've been at. And that's why we asked. Nothing earth-shaking.
Thank you.
Happy to answer questions from counselors if they have any.
I have just one question. What's the timing that you anticipate for that second public hearing?
My hope, the public hearing must be held at least 10 days before the election.
And is Lewiston having a second public hearing as a result of?
Well, our first documents were called draft. I mean,
Well, less about that and more about the attendance
there are
issue.
2 minor things that have been brought up, and I think we found a third one. Yeah, there was a blank, which needed the date of the final documents put in it in section 11.2. The issue of, you know, who pays debt, residents or taxpayers, and then there's a reference that needs to be slightly altered to in the charter review process. And it's just a reference to a state law.
The state law also says that the hearing date the setting of the hearing date has to occur 30 days before the election, which would mean suspending the rules and adding that tonight. So I think coming forward and offering the clarification through the Charter Commission and the Council in this meeting is helpful.
We really couldn't do this until this meeting because the Lewiston hearing was just a week ago. So,
When would you entertain a motion to suspend the rules so we could discuss that issue?
Under new business.
Reserve that right.
I didn't hear what he said, but
He asked when I would entertain a motion to suspend the rules to consider adding a second hearing.
Mr. Mayor, this is public session, so I don't know if we're allowed to talk. Public comment period.
I'm a lame duck, so I'm feeling flexible today.
Okay, good. I guess I have, when I saw this come over the wire today on the internet, it brought up some questions for me as to some operative dates that we're working here, and I really would like to have a clarification on these dates. I think it kind of goes along with Council Lee's question. I just want to make sure we get these right. We've had the Auburn hearing. That was July 31st, right? When would the official start of the election be? Because the state law, 38-2152 talks about election. Uses the word election. When does the election start? Does that start on the first day of absentee voting?
The election, my
I hate to
opinion,
put you on
the
the
election.
spot. I didn't-
What's that?
She's fine.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, my opinion, the election is election day. We're conducting absentee voting, or we will be, but we're not tallying any results or anything until Election Day. So, my opinion, it's November 7th.
Mayor,
One last comment.
Well, just as a point of order, can we get through the open session so that we can get to new business, so we can actually get this on the floor for an actual discussion by the council? Okay. I just want to make sure that we're having this discussion at a germane time.
It seemed a logical question to ask our esteemed clerk, so.
If we can get it on the floor to discuss. Okay, all right.
Okay, so.
Give flexibility, and so we'll discuss it more later, but you've got
Okay,
your answer.
that's fine.
The clerk,
I
believes
can-
election is election day.
I can be patient, fine.
Thank you, council.
Thank you. Thank you, Chip. Anyone else? Close the open session. There is no unfinished business for the council tonight. Oh,
We got another one.
all right. I reopen public session. The floor is yours, sir.
Don St. Germain, owner of Morris Auto Parts. Don has no preference, Tony. Mr. Cousins was over to see me about a week ago. I told him what my proposal was about changing the fences. I gave him diagrams of what I was going to do. I expected to see him here tonight, but I guess he's not showing up. So I don't know who's in charge of it. I guess he's not. So what's the scoop? Who would have looked at the diagrams or whatever?
Ed, Mike.
I believe that Mr. Cousins was going to have the city manager under this manager's report update. I don't know if he turned the material over to Peter
He
or
did
not.
turn it over. I was planning on commenting on this when I make my comments.
So a plan was turned in, a proposed layout for Washington Street North, and the update was going to go to Peter tonight. I do have some copies here. I don't know if you made copies of it. So that's what was brought forward to have the city manager update the board on what you recently turned in. I'm not sure what day you turned it in, but it was fairly recent, I believe.
Where do we stand?
I don't know if Peter wants to wait to his manager's report to discuss this.
Let's address this now while we have our business owner with us.
I think it is, I don't know if you have the email on you. Did you print the email?
If you want to hear what I was going to say and going to do, I'll explain it to you. If you don't, that's up to you.
Let's have staff update what we had them do as per our council directive first.
I believe that Eric,
Michael, I can take it from here.
you got the email
Yeah,
from
I
you?
got it. Mr. St. Germain, correct?
Right.
My understanding is the fence is not fixed at this point.
We're redoing the fence. We're rebuilding the fence. I gave him what the diagrams were going to be, what they're going to be. I expect to hear from him. I haven't heard from him.
And you said you'd like 30 days.
Well, it could be 30, could be 60. I can't guarantee it. We're in the process of working on it, regardless whether you approve it or not, because it's something that different we're doing. We're moving the fence back because I've added more records. I need more space out front to park the trucks. And I explained it to him. I hoped he would have explained it to somebody over here so somebody would know what's going on.
Well, we do know what's going on.
Well,
It hasn't been fixed at this point.
No.
Okay,
Rome wasn't built in a day either. Don't forget that.
that's true.
Takes time, takes money, and it's going to be done at appropriate time as we can do it.
Okay.
I just want to know where you guys are. I know where I am. I don't know where you guys are.
Well, I think we are, I think the staff is being very patient in terms of trying to work with you, and
Well, they
Mr.
should've
Cousins
come up-
has been.
Somebody should have contacted me, let me know the proposal I gave him, how it was going to lay it out, and let's say, yeah, we agree, this is good proposition, this will work good, something. I haven't heard from nobody.
You said Eric visited you last week?
I spoke to him last week. I brought him in diagrams of what I was going to
Yeah.
do. He said he was going to talk to somebody, I don't remember who it was. I assumed he'd get back to me, but I never heard from him.
I think there have been ongoing conversations, so.
Well, not with me. I've been left out of the picture, so
Well, he talked with you last week, so.
all he said was he would take the paperwork I gave him, give it to somebody else, whoever was in charge of it or whatever, get back to me. I haven't heard from anybody.
I think he expected that I would speak about it at this council meeting, and then we would proceed from there.
Okay, so if you got any questions?
Councilors, any questions, comments?
No questions, just a lot of concerns.
Okay.
Thank you for coming up.
Got nothing? Okay, then we'll keep going as we're going.
Close the open session. There was no unfinished business. We're on to new business. While there is none there, it appears there may be interest to suspend the rules to add an agenda item to schedule a second public hearing on the proposed consolidation agreement.
That would be my motion, Mr. Mayor.
I have a motion from Councilor Burns to suspend the rules to add an agenda item to consider a second public hearing. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion from Councilor Burns and a second from Councilor Lee. Again, to be clear on the motion, this is to suspend the rules to add an agenda item. If it is added, I would then entertain a motion to set a second public hearing. It's a two-step process. So with that, do I have any debate on the suspension of the rules motion? Councilor Titus.
Yeah, I really have a concern over something like this as important as the merger, that we suspend the rules. I mean, I think that even though maybe time is of the essence, but we just found out about this, to just suspend the rules and not let people know that that's what we're going to talk about tonight and just talk about it, make a decision, especially having a second public hearing, I think is wrong. It needs to be done at the next meeting. That's my belief.
Mr. Mayor, I'd speak to my motion.
You may.
Thank you. Mr. Titus's concerns are well-founded. This is the first time I've ever made a motion to suspend the rules, and the only reason I'm doing so is because this is the rare instance in which getting this agenda item up today allows for more public comment and transparency later. So given the time constraints, I think it's important for this council to at least have the conversation while it's still a germane conversation to have as to whether or not we ought to have another public hearing. And because of how close we are to the election, we need to have that conversation as soon as possible. So in general, I would agree with Councilor Titus's concern, but given that this is a discussion about having a public hearing, I think it's important for us to take up that conversation in a timely manner so that the public can know whether or not there will be a public meeting.
Further debate? No. No, I'm going to, if people don't have debate, they've made their mind up, so I'll prefer to have the vote. Yep, comment on suspending the rules.
My comment on suspending the rules is that this has been an acrimonious process on both sides. It has been harmful to the city, the amount of argument that is going back and forth, and it seems as if both sides should want to have a clean election in November, and this would effectuate that end.
Mr. Mayor, point of clarification, how many votes are needed for suspension of the rules?
Clerk?
Thank you.
Those in favor of the suspension of the rules to add this item, show of hands. Those opposed? It carries 4-3. Do I have a motion to move the item?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Motion
Just
to schedule a second public hearing. We can amend by adding a date after.
Okay.
So I have a motion by Councilor Burns, second by Councilor Pross. The motion being to schedule a second public hearing. Before we get into the debate on that, I'm going to look to our city manager and our clerk and perhaps offer a suggestion that if we were to have a second public hearing, given that this is on a smaller matter, that we would consider using the October 16th meeting to put a placeholder for a hearing there so we don't add any additional work. And I wanted to see whether that would be acceptable to you if you had other ideas first.
The city clerk and I have been discussing this in anticipation of this very discussion this evening, and I think we're in agreement that the next council meeting, October 16th, does make sense.
So what I would ask as a courtesy is that we amend the motion to make that the motion at this point, and then have the full debate on the motion at that point, as opposed to folks giving speeches twice.
I would accept that friendly amendment.
Councilor Prosser, do you accept that as a friendly?
Yes.
Okay. So the motion on the floor would be to schedule a second public hearing on the consolidation agreement put forward by the Joint Charter Commission that will be scheduled for the October 16th regularly scheduled City Council meeting. And with that, I'll open the floor for debate, recognizing the...
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Frankly, I'm ambivalent about the need for this meeting, but I thought it was important for the council to discuss whether or not we are going to hold this meeting today, so that if we do, it can happen in a timely manner. I think the mayor's suggestion is a good one. It would provide a minimal disruption to us to hold it during the next council meeting, and it would provide the public another opportunity to see the amended joint charter agreement. And I think in this instance, regardless of where you stand on this issue, creating more transparency, more opportunity for discussion is always better. And I would hope that those of us who are passionate about this issue would welcome additional public input, because ultimately I would hope that the public has the most information, and having the most information will make the right decision.
Other debate? Councilor Pross?
I guess I kind of agree with that, although, you know, I wouldn't necessarily put myself in the camp of feeling passionately one way or about it, but I think it's really important that now that, you know, nobody can ever look back and say, well, they never had a public hearing on the final draft. It was just the first proposed draft, and then it was revised. I don't ever want that to come back on this city council for failing to allow the public the appropriate and adequate number of opportunities for public hearing on it. So I think that it's the right step to make.
Councilor Stone, then Councilor Titus.
I have a question, Mr. Mayor. When does absentee voting start?
The ballots are actually in. We just counted them and looked them over today. We're hoping to have a booth tomorrow morning, and we'll start either tomorrow afternoon or Wednesday.
Okay, so am I correct in thinking that people could actually cast an absentee ballot before the public hearing? Okay. Another question, can the city clerk control when absentee balloting starts?
No, that's defined by state law.
30 to 45 days,
And, yeah, and the mailing that we received from the Secretary of State's office does say that we need to start issuing ballots upon receipt.
Titus?
So there is now I'll make a statement.
All right, let's limit the questions and increase the debate.
Well, so that means that a voter could make mark a vote, mark a ballot prior to the public hearing. Okay. And that's something we're comfortable with.
I think it's not appropriate to put the clerk on the spot for a political question.
No, I'm not asking the clerk. I'm just saying general rhetorical question. We're comfortable that that's okay.
Councilor Titus?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. My concern is with the reasons why we're having the public hearing. When I look at the two changes that have to be made, they're grammatical or they're technical in nature. And my experience with charters in the past has been there probably will be much more. There'll be maybe a dozen more of these changes that they're going to find afterwards that can be changed through either legislative action when the new council sits. So to say that we got to have a public hearing every time there's a grammatical error or something that's changed, a word, verbiage has changed a little bit, that didn't really change anything except an error is corrected, I don't think it's a waste of time, first of all, and not necessary. And my fear is, and I'll be open about it, it's just another forum for both sides to again air the selling or not selling of the merger. And if we want to do that, we should say we want to have more than one hearing, public hearing, for that reason, not for the correction of, because it could be the next public hearing, come up with a couple of more things that need to be changed. Do we have another public hearing after that? So I just think that it's a tremendous waste of time at this point and not necessary.
Councilor Young?
Well, it might not be necessary, but some changes have been made. And and it's a matter of free speech and public comment, and I don't think we should try to stifle that. And we still have time for that input. As for the voting, will people be aware that there's still public hearings being held? We have a mechanism to tell them when they pick up their ballots on this particular issue?
The public hearing will be posted. We'll post the public hearing, but I wouldn't be handing anything out with the ballots saying
No,
that
I
there's
mean,
gonna
but
be
we're going to make our due diligence to make the public know that that's...
Yes.
And I think people, as I talk to people that are not even registered voters, they're much aware that this is happening and they don't even have any intentions to vote, but they know that a merger or consolidation plan is being proposed. So I would be in favor of having another hearing, just to satisfy, if it did go through, that we don't have to have attorneys racking up hourlies, fees of deliberation. What do they really mean by residents versus taxpayers?
Before Councilor Lee, a question for the clerk and the manager. When the ballot language was set by the City Council, did it reference an effective date of the consolidation agreement submitted by the Joint Charter Commission?
It does not.
The council accepted documents which were the framework for the referendum. So if there are changes now that the Charter Commission has voted on, the council needs to vote to change the effective date, so it's actually accepting the final documents. Is that correct? Under the consolidation statute, the council has to accept those documents as the framework for the vote. So if the document has changed, does the council need to accept the new documents that are the basis of the vote?
I don't believe so, but I'm...
If we're not sure, can we seek legal opinion? Should this pass? If this doesn't pass, then so be it. But if it does pass, I'd like for us to be clear, are voters voting on what the council accepted earlier in the summer as the framework, or does the council need to accept the final document? Because the statute clearly links the municipal officers to the process. So if we were only given a draft and not the final document, we're missing a step.
I appreciate your question. I agree with the city clerk. I can ask our attorney. I think, with all due respect, I think that's making it overcomplicated, but I will check with the city attorney. I'm happy to do that.
I suspect you'll have some great difficulty finding a clear answer to this question, since it's probably one that has not been litigated. I think I've been very clear on where I stand on this. Win, lose, pass, fail, whatever happens, I think I'd like it to be done in November, because I don't want this conversation to continue. So that's my interest in having this resolved. But I do see two competing legal issues, one being, if we fail to have a public hearing on new language within the time period you're supposed to, it's going to be unclear what charter documents are being proposed and what people are voting on. The secondary problem to that, though, and a competing problem, is one raised by Councilor Stone. If people are voting on some of those documents as previously existed prior to the public hearing, and others who vote after that are voting on a different set of documents, we may have some unclarity at the end of that. So what I'm debating in my head right now is which is the proper route, to simply go with the documents as they've been proposed so that that's a cleaner route, or amend them, have a public hearing on that. So I'm mulling that. I'm thinking out loud right now, which one of these is going to be the cleaner process.
Other councilors? Councilor Walker?
I would just like to say that I'm not sure that this room is going to be big enough on that date if we're going to go through this whole thing again. Auburn seems to draw a pretty good crowd versus our half-sister across the river there. So I don't know if I agree with having another forum or not. I think all you're going to do is bring up a line of these people and a line of them people, and in the end, you're You're going to have the same exact thing when we go away. A lot of baloney said and nothing really meant by anything.
I will say that it would be my recommendation to the council that if I were chairing a second hearing, that since this would be an amended consolidation agreement, that I would limit the scope of comments to the amendment to the document. So it would be limited to those two items referenced. Further debate? I will ask for a vote. What we have for a motion is to hold a second public hearing on the final language as provided by the Joint Charter Commission. Madam Clerk?
The amendment first?
We had a friendly amendment, so it was put forward for October 16th.
Oh, okay, all right.
So it would be October 16th during the regularly scheduled meeting. Those in favor, show of hands. Those opposed? It fails 3-4. We're on to reports. A few items I want to let the council know about. Michael Chamings and I both had the opportunity to sit with representatives from the United Farmer Veterans of America last week. If you can recall, Rudy Wing came forward during the recreational plan unit development proposal, mentioned that he was now the Western Maine director for that veteran farmers group. He followed up with me wanting to have a chance to share what they're thinking about with respect to opportunities to support and attract veterans that are interested in farming and the role Auburn could play in that, that growing sector. It was a very constructive conversation, and more to come on that. We have shared documents with them about the agricultural study, encourage their active participation while there's not a direct seat on the advisory group. Obviously, the notices will be publicly available. If they've got targeted projects, they were encouraged to communicate directly with staff about opportunities. So just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of that. Each of you at your station had an Auburn Public Library reusable grocery bag with the new logo for the Auburn Public Library. That was from the annual meeting. The logo's on the other side. You held up the blank side. There you go. I'm sure there's many more available if folks are interested. The library had their annual meeting of corporators last week, where the work for the last year was highlighted, as well as the rollout of the new logo, which is actually an image of the building's facade, which has been used in the past. So it's sort of bringing things back to life here. So it was a great meeting. It was well attended. Good things are happening up at the library. And if anyone has questions or you do need another bag, let me know, and I'm sure we can pull it off. I want to thank the City Council and staff and the public for their patience as we went to the domestic violence vigil or action night, as their executive director of Safe Voices said. I think it means a lot to those who are there for the vigil to see. I know we're all across the street, but that we put priority on being there as a show of support to not only survivors, but folks who work very hard for not nearly enough pay for the work they do to support folks facing domestic violence and trying to escape and build a new life. So I want to just thank the council and staff that came out for that, and obviously our police department and staff there do a phenomenal job as a support system, so Chief Kroll and everyone under him. Michael, as well as Peter and I, had the opportunity to attend Merita's fall event that they had in Lewiston last week. Merita's the State Real Estate Development Trade Association. They have a meeting once a year here in the Lewiston-Auburn area, so it's a good chance to meet with developers, contractors that support the development community, and just be there to press some flesh and network. It was, I think, a productive event, and I was glad to see that Auburn staff and elected leadership had a good showing. The last item was a meeting last Friday that I was able to convene with city staff, Maine DOT, the St. Lawrence and Atlantic Railroad, as well as the Lewiston-Auburn Railroad. Dick Trafton, as president, attended. really to talk about a reset in the relationship we have at the intermodal area along the Lewis and Auburn rail line and the St. Lawrence and Atlantic line through Auburn. That area a decade ago looked very different than it does today. The types of shipments being made are drastically different, but it's still a unique asset that can position Auburn and our region well, but obviously specifically the area along that rail line for economic development around freight movement. And knowing that we've had not only turnover here in Auburn Hall, but in other agencies, trying to reestablish relationships, reintroduce folks, and establish those points of contact were my goal as mayor. So I want to thank Peter for being at that meeting and supporting that. I thought it was a very constructive conversation. There were some very specific action items about ways we could start working with them to generate not only new business for existing businesses in this Lewis and Auburn region to look at moving freight by rail, but how we might be able to work with them in their network to do business attraction to that area. There may be more to come on that in the near term, but certainly long term, it was great to see everyone in a room having that conversation. So it's a sort of a brief update on my end, and I'll look down towards Councilor Young, and we'll take some councilor reports.
No report.
Just want to report quickly to the City Council and the public on the school committee meeting that we had last week, where we had a really wonderful, informative session with the curriculum director of the department and some other administrators that do work around curriculum development and specifically around the proficiency-based diploma changes that are happening at our public schools. Very much was instituted through state government mandates in a way, but every department has had its own opportunity to sort of implement the mandated changes in some creative ways and however they felt appropriate within some certain parameters. And it was really a great presentation to hear from the department what they've already been doing for years and what they've been working toward. And I think as more families are starting to see that change happening, those changes in diplomas and how grades are assigned within the schools, if you do have questions about it, looking back to the PowerPoint presentation that was given, which is a matter of public record now and available on the school department's website, is a great place to go for explanations and answers. When you see a grading system change from, a 4.0 GPA system, A's through B's and D's and F's and C's and all the things that most of us grew up with, and now the world is doing something different, and Maine is part of that, and we're a part of that in Auburn, and all the communities in Maine are a part of that. So when you see that happening there, it can be confusing. There can be a lot of questions and also a lot of skepticism about how it's going to affect your kids or how it's going to affect their ability to get into colleges or how is it going to affect AP credits. And the department's been really working hard over a period of years to get out in front of those questions and to really work on these answers from the administrative level and then down through, of course, implementing those changes through the entire alliance of teachers that are actually putting these things to work at the ground level. So it was an excellent presentation, and it's far too complicated of an issue for me to go into any further detail about. But I know as parents see some of those grades coming home in the first years of their implementation, and as you hear more about it as parents or members of the public, if you do have an interest, I would really ask you to go back and look at last Wednesday's presentation that was given to the school committee by way of an update on those changes that were happening. So,
thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to publicly thank Maybe and I and the staff of the Auburn Public Library for hosting the Sun Journal-sponsored forum on the 25th. It was a very warm evening. The place was packed. The overflow room, I've heard, was full. Technology wasn't cooperating that night, and that is too bad, but you know, there was definitely an A for effort on the part of the library staff to pull that off, to pull that event off, and so I think there were 3 of us there from the council. appreciate the fact that they were there and for their interest. But it was a good evening, and a lot of information was shared. And again, thank the library for all that they did that evening.
If I could just make a quick correction, the meeting was not last week, it was the 20th, which was the Wednesday before. I just wanted to correct that, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I attended the Western Avenue Neighborhood Watch Group, and it's very good to go out and hear the concerns of people within neighborhoods. Sunderland Drive Neighborhood Watch Group is tomorrow night at Sam's Italian Sandwich Shop on Court Street. But one of the things that, as I've been going to these, has come up time and time again is safety and travel speeds. And it seems like it's a universal problem everywhere, but I guess Auburn's no different. And you hear of some cities like Westbrook that are pleading for people to please slow down. And then we hear a story, or didn't hear, I happened to come across the two people that got injured on Cedar Street in Lewiston. And there's just a lot of craziness going on. And it led me to ask the question, maybe you can answer it, Mr. Mayor, but we have a new committee, a bike ped committee that's now a joint city committee. And I posed the question of whether or not they could help with some of these areas. Western Avenue is one of them that begs for a bike lane or set up some sort of a way to narrow the road down, and yet it's been kind of overlooked over these years, and people are catching the speed there because it's wide open. So it's real close to a school, it's on the way to EL. You would think that would be an excellent place. So I just wanted to, maybe make that known, and whoever I'd have to contact to get that started.
I will send an email to Jeremiah Bartlett, who is an active member on the committee, volunteer member. It's the Complete Street Committee, and I think they always welcome taking up agenda items. So I'll connect him with you, and maybe one of the members can, I know staff support the committee, but I think there's great value in having the volunteers on that committee be able to meet the neighbors firsthand.
Oh, absolutely, because it seems like it's a concern everywhere. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, and again, anybody who wants to attend these meetings, you don't have to necessarily be from that neighborhood, but I, urge everybody from those neighborhoods to please come to these meetings. They're very informative. The police department is well represented at these meetings, and any current questions or concerns you might have. More speed limit signs going up, and so neighborhood, ask for your speed limit sign as soon as possible, because I guess we're going to be getting some more. The other thing was that I attended the Auburn Water and Sewer District meetings, and one of the highlights there was that they are changing their hours. They're now going to be open from 7:30 to 4 rather, as opposed to 8 to 4:30, as was before that started October 1st. So just keep that in mind. It's 7:30 to 4. Also, they've been moving right along with the Lake Street projects and other projects, but they've also found that so far they've kind of they misinterpreted what the Cascade was going to do for their revenue, and they're down a little bit on that. They just miscalculated. However, they have been able to find expense savings to make up for that miscalculation, so they should be right on budget by the end of the year. So that's all I have.
I was going to use my report to answer Larry Pelletier's question, but he's no longer here, so I'll still answer the question. The charter already provides at section 2.2 that the city council may appoint by rule non-voting student representatives to serve with the city council, and I think future city councils should definitely take up that effort. That's it.
Thank you. The United New Auburn Association had its meeting last week, and everything went great. I was asked to ask this council that sits here now to make sure they speak into their mics, because people at home have to put their ear on the TV set to even hear us. And that's because many of us talk with our mics way the heck over there or over there. I've been asked to please talk into the mic so everybody can hear me. And there's a lot of people out there that have a little deafness from maybe their job or maybe because we're just getting old. But I told them I would bring it up. So us as counselors, please speak into the mic. It'll make people a lot happier at home. The other thing, Neighborhood Watch meeting. We had that this past week as well. I asked Lieutenant Harrington to please think about some other things that may get the neighborhood a little more excited than just to talk about the speeders that go by at, one time of the day or the other. And then talk about maybe the person that leaves the door unlocked and somebody may take something that doesn't belong to them. Because people like to hear the things that go on in the neighborhood, but it gets pretty boring to hear the same thing every 30 days. So we have asked our leader to ask the Sheriff Department if Mr. Sampson would like to come and be a speaker next month. So we're hoping that that happens, and maybe something new will come about in the New Auburn area that Mr. Sampson can either talk about the new construction that's going on in the Sheriff Department or on top of it, as well as the 911 inside. There's some system going on in there that's new. So we're hoping just something to excite the people to want to come instead of having the same 15, 18 people, which I'm thankful we have them. But I'd like to see 36 or 48 or 100. And we have room enough for them people. So please, everybody, when we hold the meetings, please come to them. I think you'll enjoy the meetings. One more debate across the bridge in New Auburn at Gendron Frankel building, which is the old St. Mary's Church building. Be there at 5 o'clock. I believe it's going to be packed. The city of Lewiston needs a big turnout of people, and it'll make us all look good if you come and listen and give some of your comments. So please show up tomorrow night, 5 o'clock, and watch and listen to the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just want to draw the council's and the public's attention to the Edward Little Red Eddies football team, currently sitting 5-0, one of two undefeated teams in the Class A conference in the state of Maine. They are, I think they have the best record since I played back in 2008, and looks like they're not slowing down anytime soon. So the Red Eddies' next two games are at home, and they have one final game in Lewiston for the Battle of the Bridge 3 weeks from now. Lewiston is also doing very well this year, so I would encourage folks. Seems like we're getting a few more people to the home games every week. We had very good attendance at a great game against Oxford Hills 2 weeks ago. I would encourage folks to get out this Friday and support the Red Eddies at Walton Field.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a few comments that I'd like to make. There was a woman who spoke at the last meeting, made some public comments about tenant conditions. I just would like to report that staff followed up with her and spoke to her about that situation. She would not give the address of the building, so it's hard for us to be able to respond. I also want to mention that Eric Cousins, the Deputy Economic Community Development Director, spoke at the State House the other day regarding draft law on marijuana. I was pleased that he went. This all happened very quickly, and shared that information with the Legislative Policy Committee member, Bob Stone, Councilor Stone, who's been signed by the council. And I thought Eric did a really good job in putting his testimony together. Representative Bruce Bickford has been actively advocating for our interests. It looks like a revised draft will likely reflect the following. 5% of the excise tax will be returned to the host community. And another, I think, important highlight is 5% sales tax would be returned to the municipality. So we are closely monitoring that. Denise Clavat, who's the Assistant City Manager, is our legislative advocate and has been working on that issue, as well as Jody DeRisco, who's the Executive Assistant in the City Manager's office. I also would like to mention that in terms of the issue of streetlight acquisition, which has been discussed for several years now, we are continuing to work on that. Derek Belanger, who's our Facilities Manager and Purchasing Agent, has been in touch with representatives from the cities of Rockland, South Portland, and Biddeford, as well as town of Falmouth on their approach. They collaborated to create an RFQ, and which is referred to qualifications. We are looking into utilizing an RFQ, and my suggestion will be to have Derek come to the council with the workshop and talk about this. We have an opportunity to be able to achieve some substantial savings by doing this. I also would like to mention that we are working on the continuing dialogue that we had regarding the Auburn Maine Sustainability Program in relationship to the report presentation that was given. We are working on that as well, and the evidence so far from the communities that have been contacted is that that is a good tool for planning and budgeting, so we will be coming back to the council on that as well. Thank you very much.
Our second open session of the evening, if anyone would like to speak to the council. Okay. I'll close the open session. There are two executive sessions remaining with respect to economic development. None of those will have action this evening. We will come out between executive sessions to take a further motion to enter for the second and then return to adjourn. With that, I would entertain a motion from the council for the income utilization discussion.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we go into executive session pursuant to Title I MRS Section 405 sub 6 sub C regarding an economic development matter.
Second.
Motion from Councilor Pross, second from Councilor Walker. Do I have any discussion?
Could you speak into your mic a little bit more, Councilor Cross?
Those in favor,
Low
show of
energy,
hands. Those opposed? Those abstaining? Carry 601 with Councilor Lee conflicted. Moved by Counselor Titus, second by Counselor Frost. Those in favor, show of hands. Carries 502. Counselors Walker and Young out of the room. Thank you, Sue. Appreciate your patience.
Thanks.